just you get to choose. Right? Like here's the scenario. The environment gives us something which can be perceived as negative, can be perceived as not working, can be perceived as problematic. The world's ending. But we get to choose to see it like that, or we get to choose to see it as an opportunity.
So clearly that it's my responsibility now to do that for other people. If I have information and, other people's success is my success and vice versa.
Because you know what? Like, the challenges or the roadblocks are the journey themselves.
There's no big things. It's all little things compounding on top of each other. Sean Glaze is an expert at helping leaders create exceptional team cultures. His programs inspire your people to laugh together so they can have more success working together. Sean's 4 books, The Unexpected Leader, Rapid Teamwork, The 10 Commandments of Winning Teammates, and Staying Coachable, are entertaining parables with powerful takeaways for building and leading great teams. As a successful coach and educator for over 20 years, Sean gained valuable insights into how to develop winning teams and founded Great Results Teambuilding to share those lessons with smart team leaders. Sean's engaging conference keynotes and interactive team building event programs equip and inspire the individuals on your team to be winning teammates. What issues are you dealing with now that would disappear if you could build a team culture that inspired accountability, trust, and team-first attitude? All this and more on this week's episode of Truth Seekers with Sean Glaze. Welcome to another episode of Truth Seekers, along with Coach Nick and myself, Coach Josh of Pro Advisor Coach. We have Sean Glaze joining us today. Sean, welcome to the show.
How you doing, guys? Glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. Why don't you just give a brief little background about yourself and we'll jump right into the conversation here.
Yeah, I've been working for the last, 12 to 15 years with team leaders and organizations that are looking to create a more positive and profitable team culture. But oddly enough, my background was not as a speaker or a facilitator for team building events and team culture growth. It was as a high school basketball coach myself, where I kind of learned a whole lot of what I've now shared across different industries, what means to build a more positive and profitable team culture, because I made mistakes that now hopefully I can help others to avoid.
Well, I want to kick us off with a question about being coachable, because that applies to so many things, not just basketball and not just business, but what does that term mean to you to be coachable?
Well, I very much appreciate you teeing that up for me. And I know from our earlier conversations prior to this interview, I'm really excited because my most recent book is obviously Staying Coachable. And as a basketball coach, one of the most frustrating things I experienced was talented people who were part of our team who weren't necessarily willing to adjust or to modify what they were comfortable with in order to help to make themselves and then obviously us as a team better. And so you try and go in and help somebody to change their shot or to do something differently than they had been taught to do before. And there was, when I was that young coach, when you were demanding and commanding and you need to and you've got to, anytime you push somebody, there's that, obviously as an older leader, you realize there's going to be that natural pushback. But as a young coach, I hadn't learned that lesson yet. And so I was banging my head against the wall of people with, kind of stubborn personalities or people who weren't willing just to trust in the midst of those moments. And so I realized as I got older that, command and demand was nowhere near as effective as asking questions. And so that was basically the premise of the book is, everybody starts off coachable. Your listeners are where they are in terms of their level of success because they were coachable enough to get themselves to that level. But I think at some point, an overwhelming majority of people, regardless of circumstance or industry, at some point become complacent or comfortable. And I think that it's in those moments of complacency that we sometimes get annoyed by opportunities or encouragements to improve instead of appreciative of, where we don't necessarily apply what we could. And we think that we're good enough, or we think that we're doing well enough, and whatever that might be. And so I've shared with a number of groups now, being coachable is about 2 things. It's about wanting to be better, and willing to change. Now, when I'm in a conference as a speaker, when you ask, who here wants to be better, every hand goes up, right? Everybody wants to be better. It's that second part of the equation that's difficult, is that willing to change. And so what makes us as individuals willing to change, and what helps us as leaders to get our people to change, isn't that command and demand structure of leadership, but how can we ask better questions to get them to be inspired and committed to make that change is going to benefit them.
Coach Nick, I want to get your thoughts on this, because this is the simplest way I can make sense of this for progress, right? If we've gotten to a new level, or if we want to, inevitably we know we need to learn something new, or learn something that we don't have right now. So what is it about, like, I don't know, we reach a certain level to where, you mentioned comfort level, Sean, but like there's something there with like where that something turns off, and like I'm closed off, like I've made it, like this is where I am. I don't know, there's almost like a resistance to going higher, like the same principles that got you there, like you shut them off for some reason. Coach, what is that? Have you thought about that?
I'm at the relative peak of my mountain. It's flat. I haven't got to hold on for dear life anymore. I can coast a little bit. It's comfortable. I haven't got to push myself, and I'm not quite sure what's there, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to remain in that place, because I've got it from here. I've got it figured out. I know it all. I know. Like, it's like, that's it. It's like, once you can hear yourself saying, I know, like, that should be the, what I wrote down was, I've got it figured all out. I hear the people saying that in my corporate career. It's like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Like, I know how to do this. I got it. It's like, that's great. But then you've just created a parameter, right? You've created that limitations. There's never going to be any more growth, because without that openness and the wanting to be better, and then they're actually proving it and putting it into action, it doesn't change, right? So I think it's that the comfort zone again. It's like, especially if it's been something that's been a big push for you, you want to get to that point where it's naturally to go, I want to take my foot off the gas a little bit, because it's been such a push so far. Like, now I'm done. And unless you're a person which has the constant drive, or has a coach to push you there, or has some external event,
it's natural.
You get a natural, it's natural, yeah. Just going to stay there.
I love that you mentioned that, Nick, because one of the parts of the story, and the story that I tell in the book, is a parable that kind of carries with it some of the nuggets of content that I would share with audiences. But that mention you make of letting out the sigh because you've reached the summit of wherever you had imagined being. You've climbed that mountain. And I think that, the air at the top of a mountain is thin for a reason. We're not meant to stay there. We're meant to find that next mountain. And, the idea of, what is it that makes us comfortable? I think sometimes we do reach the summit. Sometimes we do achieve that success we desire. But I think oftentimes we also see people in circumstances where they've reached a level that's comfortable, and they set up camp, and it's not the top of the mountain, but it's something that's good enough for me now. And so whether it is the camper, or whether it's the person that continued climbing and did actually reach the summit, ultimately our job is, if I want my people to be better, if I want me to be better, I need to find a new mountain. I need to find a new challenge, because it's what I become through the climb that is really the key.
And Coach and I have used that analogy in the past with, like, once we get on top of that mountain, we can see other mountains from there. It's like you reach a new peak to see other peaks from there, and there's always more to go, which is the best part of what Coach and I like to do in coaching, is like, okay, we reach that goal, what else can we do? Like, what else can we see from here that we can shoot for? Yeah. Sean, I'm curious, because Coach Nick and I kind of have this pack of, like, we can't coach the uncoachable. So somebody who's uncoachable, we don't, okay, best of luck to you. In basketball, you can't really do that. Or in engagements with companies, maybe you have an agreement with them, you come in and you come across people who maybe are not as coachable. What do you do? How do you get through to those people?
I think that was really the premise of the book, is because as any leader, and you guys as coaches working with leaders of teams know, there is always going to be that individual who has secured for themselves an executive coach, or that person that has a team of people that they're tasked with improving and developing to be able to accomplish that next goal. And sometimes you get pushback, sometimes you get resistance, and sometimes, even though somebody hires a coach, they don't always take advantage of and apply the information and the ideas that a coach might provide. And so again, it's not about wanting to be better, it's, are you really willing to change? And I think that what really opens the door to people not just being willing to, but people being enthusiastic about and committed to change, is to give them a gap. And that's what you create when you identify that mountaintop. What is that next mountaintop? What is that thing that we are hungry for? And
Through
once you
questions.
identify,
You identify that through questions, right? Just by asking that question, then you can.
and very simple questions, but sometimes very difficult introspective conversations to really identify what is it that I really want. And that's such a simple question. And some people ask, how do I get so and so? And I think sometimes the more powerful and more difficult question is, what is it that you want? Because if you identify what you really want, you're going to be able to find a lot of paths to get there. But that clarity about what you want, what we're actually seeking to achieve, is the first question. And then the second question in the book that the people in the story are presented with is not just what do you want and establishing a hunger, but just as importantly, if not more so, are you honest about where you are now? And can you accurately describe where you are in terms of your numbers and current performance and current situation? And then that's where the gap is, because you're going to see that gap. And I think if there is a gap, then we naturally want to close that gap. But if I'm being pushed to do something and I've not been introduced to my own gap, I'm going to be far less likely to be humble enough to ask for and apply information that's going to help me to close it.
Yeah, I wrote this down as literally it came out of your mouth, Sean, because there's two things I always say that I want when I'm working with people. I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for people that are coachable, meaning they're open to new perspectives and taking new action. So I roll that together. And the second thing I'm looking for is hunger. And so we're saying the same thing. It's just so interesting to see, because as I also say to a lot of people, what we do can apply to anyone. Like it does. It's just principles and concepts. And so I believe everyone should have a coach, but who should you have a coach? Which is the best one? It's like, which one do you resonate with most? That's really what it comes down to. It's like, who do you find that you want to go work with? And that makes the relationship even more powerful. That hunger, that creating a gap is so important, because most people don't know what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they do, they're not clear about what it is specifically, and they certainly don't know where they are, right? It's like one of those maps we used to have when we were kids, like the treasure map with like the big X, like the treasure is. It's like, that's great, but it's like, where the hell am I? Like I need a big "you are here" sign first, because I don't know where I'm starting from. Like that's the treasure, but am I standing next to it, or am I 6,000 miles away? It's like, I don't know. You got that, and that's it's a really important distinction to create that both sides of that, because you create the tension. Without the tension, it's just like there's no anchor.
Absolutely. And the work that you do with leaders and the work that I've done with team leaders is all about creating, as you said, creating first an awareness of the gap, and then to give them the tools and the awareness of how they can take action to then close it. But I think that, that complacency is only cured with clarity, clarity of where we want to be and clarity of where we are. Clarity creates commitment in teams and with leaders.
We were just talking again on a previous episode of the difference between unengaged employees and disengaged, and the difference of, unengaged will be engaged if they're clear about what to be engaged about. It's that gray area that prevents people from being committed to it. And clarity just seems to be this principle that keeps showing up for me recently, in recent days and weeks, for whatever reason. But it's so powerful. Coach, what you said about, you said most people don't know what they want. And even when they do, they're not clear about it. It's so true. Like, I have client calls where people get on and it's like, I'm not happy. It's like, well, what would you need to see or to achieve to get happy? And they have no idea. They can't answer that question. So it's an interesting thing. I've always thought of it as like a FOMO. Like if you pick something, like I know what it is to be happy, it is that thing, and you're giving up the pursuit of everything else. And maybe that's the resistance of actually defining something, but it's also just opening your eyes to the things that you are happy about, that you already have, like the gratitude conversation. So anyway, that's a little spin-off on what we were talking about. I just trying to make sense of it.
I just think that I think we're all very much talking about the same thing. When we work with teams and organizations in terms of culture, culture is nothing more than the behaviors that you allow to be repeated on your team. But so often people get frustrated as leaders and as teammates because they're living in fog, because you've not established those standards or those expectations. And I think that, you'll have so many different organizations that have a mission statement, or they may have a vision statement, or may even have values, but they've not really defined, what does that look like for us every day? What does that look like in our interactions? What are the standards and the commitments we're going to make in terms of remote work and how we're going to interact and what I can expect from you? And I think that setting those expectations whether you're going through change. Again, people don't mind detours, but people get frustrated by fog. And I think that's a leader's job, is to make sure that you clear away the fog by not just clarifying where we're going and where we're at, but also giving people the sense of, I think that the engagement that you mentioned, because engagement and culture are the two terms that so many times people will come to me, we need more engagement, or we've got a problem with culture. And they hear those terms tossed around, but I don't know that there is a real clear understanding or definition of either. And again, I mentioned before, I think that culture is just the behaviors you allow to be repeated, and you can actually change behaviors by changing awareness and changing beliefs. But specifically to engagement, my job as a leader, or my job as a teammate, is to make sure that I help myself and help others to connect those dots, because engagement is just how much do you care about the results that your efforts are contributing to. And a lot of times there's burnout, or there's a sense of, that I'm not having an impact because we've not helped them to see how what they're doing each day really does have an impact on something larger and more significant than themselves, because that's what gives us purpose, and purpose or mission are so much of an important part of somebody being happy in whatever role they're in.
How do you find, Sean, and I don't know how, you haven't shared how specifically, I don't know, I'm sorry, but how the type of organizations that you work with, because what I've found is that whilst all that stuff I believe is true, it's much more cumbersome to deal with that in an organization that's large, because it becomes more esoteric, especially for people that are in that middle layer, if you will. Where it's like, okay, like you've got to be engaged, and you've got to know that what you're doing actually impacts the outcome, and you've got to know like what the outcome really is and why it's important, and do you align with that vision, mission. So I find I much prefer to work with a smaller company, because we can actually see like the thread all the way through.
Yes.
And I get like flashbacks and shivers from my prior experience of 20 years working for big banks, and basically just being in like the merry-go-round of like what I do doesn't really matter, and some people are telling me it does, and some people are saying other things, and so I don't really care about any of it anyway. And so even if I was really focused to be engaged, I would find it very difficult to latch on to what that is. And especially if people are coming through and they're still figuring out the concepts on that, that becomes much more challenging to get to. I'd love your thoughts on that, if you would share.
Yeah, well, I think that the size of an organization absolutely has an impact upon the impact you feel as an individual in that organization. And I think that, our job is hopefully to break down that large organization into small enough teams that people feel that they are a small but significant contributing part of something larger. And again, everything looks easy when you're 50,000 feet above it. It's in the midst of those individual one-on-one conversations, in the midst of those interactions you're having every day with the people on your team, that's hopefully not so large that you can't have the one-on-one meetings and the conversations and the connection with people that gives them a sense of meaningful work and of mattering, because everybody wants to feel seen. And when you're part of something that's too large and you don't get that connection, and you don't feel that there's that kind of connect the dots understanding of how what I'm doing does have an impact somewhere that's meaningful, then people do begin to lose a sense of purpose in their work. And again, I think that if we as leaders can help people connect those dots, and if you as an organizational leader can see that there's a need to really emphasize those connections and to give the emphasis to your leaders to have those one-on-ones, it makes it a little bit easier for people to connect those dots and to feel that sense of engagement that you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. And then what is that you feel like is the level of frequency required to keep that front and center? Because the other part of it is a big lift and immersive experience of setting the stage and talking about engagement, and having really people understand that in order to be successful here, you've got to start with being coachable and being open to these things, and then have them figure out what those things are that they're aligned to within the vision and the purpose, and then having the behaviors that create the culture. Like, if you have all that in one place, you can get a lot of stuff done in a fairly short order. But how do you make sure that you continue to have that space repetition to keep it front and center? How do you feel about the frequency?
Yeah, well, I think frequency, in one of the conversations I'll have with any manager or team leader, whether it's a coach or regardless of industry, in terms of organizations and businesses, is I believe you need to have some type of one-on-one contact, 10, 15-minute check-in, conversation, connection before content, what needs to happen in terms of their role, at least every couple of weeks. I don't think that every quarter is often enough. And certainly, well, we're going to have my annual review. Annual reviews are going to be worthless because, again, I couldn't as a basketball coach wait until the banquet to change somebody's behavior on the court. It's in the midst of those moments that people improve, and you want to have those teachable moments. You want to be there and available to support and to encourage and to be a resource for your people. Again, hopefully it's as a servant leader that you're there to help to develop and grow your people and give them a sense of kind of support and encouragement. But I think one of the things you said earlier is so important, because with the larger the organization, if somebody were to call me and they're in a huge organization, but they are, as a middle manager, trying to influence their team, you can have some impact, but it's really tough if I'm trying to have a cultural impact. If we're really trying to change a culture, it's tough to roll a boulder uphill. It's a whole lot easier for that boulder to roll downhill and for something to start at the top, and it'd be so much easier to have that fountain impact by clarifying from the top, here's what we're going to do, and let's clarify what those steps are going to be and how that's going to ripple through. Because ultimately, if we're going to change behaviors, it's the consistency that you get because of those touch points and because of the support that you feel from the people that are making decisions sometimes above you.
Yeah, I wonder if it can start almost like on a middle out basis, to where like you change the culture within a team, if that can have a ripple, like, hey, what are those guys doing over there? What do they know? Like, if people start to turn their heads and see what's going on, I guess as a coach, that's ideal, right? Because then it's the referral speaks for itself. I'm just curious on that a similar topic, Sean, what's the biggest team that you have coached, and how do you approach it? Do you bring on, help at a certain point, or what does that look like for you?
Well, what it's looked like for me in terms of working with organizations, and whether it is a construction firm or an insurance company or a bank, or it's really been across different industries, is they'll engage me to come in and talk for their annual meeting, or to come in and work with their group in a half day or a full day team building event. And that ends up being a catalyst event where we can introduce some of those ideas that are far more powerfully implemented over time following. So yeah, it's really important to set the stage and to have those conversations early with the leadership about what you want the outcomes to be. What do you actually want the results to be? Because you're going to have some impact in one event, but team building and team leadership isn't a one-time event. It's something that begins with this activity or this experience that changes some awareness, that changes some beliefs, that'll change a few behaviors. But those behaviors are going to go back to what they had been beforehand if you don't do something consistently afterwards. So I think that the really powerful conversations in terms of coaching and having a committed organization to changing a culture of what are we going to do after that event to make sure that we ensure a continued emphasis on those things that really are going to move the meter. And that's going to be where it just depends upon the size of the organization and how committed they are to really making those conversations part of their meetings, that you see some of the outcomes actually occur.
I'm going to steal one of Coach Nick's favorite lines. It's the repetition that trumps resistance. Right? Just over and over and over. It's the showing up. That's why coaching one-on-one is so powerful, because whenever you're trying to break through, if you're trying to get to another level, there is some barrier, there is some belief system you have to get through. I wrote that down, Sean. Awareness, beliefs, behaviors. Like, that's all about what our mind scan's about. So that's funny that's hitting home. But it's the consistency that will get you to the other side of whatever you're trying to break through, that barrier. Mm-hmm. All right. We could talk here. So let's start to wrap up. Coach Nick, curious to hear what your takeaway is today, because there's so many nuggets we could choose from here. We got a minefield, a gold minefield here.
A gold minefield, yeah. I think one of the biggest things always is when talking to fellow coach, speaker, facilitator, is just how the principles and concepts are like timeless, and it's just, I love to see it's almost like a game for me at this stage, like the art of like, okay, how does Sean articulate this particular principle? Where does he get his juice from when he's talking about this concept? Yeah, and like what little nuggets and cool stuff can I have and take little upgrades from it? And so that's my favorite thing from today. And like take those little bits and pieces and say, like, okay, what's the next part of it? Like, how do I use that for me? How can I make it change? And so all those little things together combine to make a massive difference when I'm serving my clients. So thank you for that. And living in the fog is important. I always say that, the comfort zone is like a collective blanket and fog, and all of those things kind of like start to pop to the front of my mind. So thank you for all those little bits and pieces.
Well, I so love to have the opportunity to have these conversations simply because, like you said, every good coach, every good leader is a good thief first, and you're going to steal ideas and you're going to modify somebody else's and how they're applying it in their organization with their team and say, oh, well, I like that idea and I think that it applies to us this way. But like you said, those principles, whether you come to them from basketball or from business or from whatever other area, you can do it in the arts, you can do it in so many different facets of team leadership, that people come to those same principles, that if you can focus on those principles and apply them with your group, they have incredible impact. Absolutely.
Sean, sounds like you got some jingle bells going over there. Yeah. You got a friend with you?
He's just awakened, so he's ready for his afternoon walk.
He wants to be on camera. Well, I'm going to grab a takeaway and then we'll come to you, Sean, for the final word here. So mine today is awareness, beliefs, behaviors. Was a term that you mentioned. You might even say, behaviors is the equivalent of actions. So our actions follow our awareness and our belief systems, and that can only start from being coachable, right? That's bringing the conversation full circle, just being open to another perspective, that if you want to go more, if you want to go higher, if you want to gain something you don't have right now, you have to be able to be open to other perspectives. So awareness, beliefs, and then behaviors. I love it. Thank you. So bring us home, Sean. If you want to hold up that book again, I want to see what that was, and just some sort of takeaway or what you're leaving the audience with today.
Again, thrilled to be here. Hopefully they're able to carry, put in their back pocket something that they can apply with their team. Ultimately, as we mentioned, I think that the idea of being willing to change is the difficult part of that kind of definition of staying coachable. Everybody wants to be better, but are you willing to change? And individually, what is it that helps me to be more willing to change and committed to change is asking the right questions. And so the book is really about providing a story that introduces those questions that allow individuals to be more coachable and to make those changes that lead to actions that have results. And that's the reason that you guys do what you do, is to ask those meaningful questions that people are going to focus upon that maybe they wouldn't have thought about on their own, that really have a far more significant impact than demands or commands they might have gotten elsewhere.
So well said. Appreciate it. A great, well put together conversation today as well. So Sean Glaze, thank you for joining us.
Enjoyed it very much. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching another episode of Truth Seekers. We appreciate your interaction. So please comment, like, subscribe to YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want more, check out some of our links to our masterclass, The Achiever's Mindset, and come join our LinkedIn group. And what do you want to see more of? Remember, we're here to share the simple secrets of successful. So help us do that. What do you want to see? What do you want to see more of? Thanks, and see you again next time.